Today we are going to be reading The Dog of Pompeii by Louis Untermeyer. The Dog of Pompeii is about a boy and a dog who lived during the time of 79 AD, which is the famous eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which is by the city of Pompeii and Herculaneum. This story is historical fiction, meaning that it takes place in a real time around a real event, but the names of the people have been fictionalized, and some of the events are guessed. So the author took guesses as to what certain things meant and stood for. But without further ado, let's start The Dog of Pompeii by Louis Untermeyer. Tito and his dog Bimbo lived, if you could call it living, under the wall where it joined the inner gate. They really didn't live there, they just slept there. They lived anywhere. Pompeii was one of the gayest of the old Latin towns, but although Tito was never an unhappy boy, he was not exactly a merry one. The streets were always lively with shining chariots and bright red trappings. The open air theaters, rocked with laughing crowds, sham battles, and athletic sports, were free for the asking in the great stadium. Once a year, the Caesar visited the pleasure city, and the fireworks lasted for days. The sacrifices of the forum were better than a show, but Tito saw none of these things. He was blind, had been blind from birth. He was known to everyone in the poorer quarters, but no one could say how old he was. No one remembered his parents. No one could tell where he came from. Bimbo was another mystery. As long as people could remember seeing Tito, about 12 or 13 years, they had seen Bimbo. Bimbo had never left his side. He was not only a dog, but a nurse, a pillow, a playmate, mother, and father to Tito. Now, in my experience with this story, a lot of people have trouble keeping the two straight. Remember, Tito is the boy. He's 12 or 13 years old. We don't know how old yet. He is blind, and his dog Bimbo lives with him. Now, what's unique is their family? No, they live together inside the inner gate of the city, so they are homeless, and we would call Tito a orphan. Okay. They mentioned something about the Caesar. That's the Roman emperor. We often hear about Augustus Caesar. Okay. And here's a picture of a fountain. I know Mr. Tipton had showed some pictures of Pompeii when he was there, and there's a fountain very similar to this. Did I say Bimbo never left his master? Perhaps I had better say comrade, for if anyone was the master, it was Bimbo. I was wrong. Bimbo did trust Tito alone exactly 3 times a day. It was a fixed routine, a custom understood between boy and dog since the beginning of their friendship. And the way it worked was this. Early in the morning, shortly after dawn, while Tito was still dreaming, Bimbo would disappear. When Tito woke, Bimbo would be sitting quietly at his side, his ears cocked, his stump of a tail tapping the ground, and a fresh baked bread, more like a large round roll, at his feet. Tito would stretch himself. Bimbo would yawn, then they would breakfast. At noon, no matter where they happened to be, Bimbo would put his paw on Tito's knee, and the two of them would return to the inner gate. Tito would curl up in the corner almost like a dog and go to sleep, while Bimbo, looking quite important, almost like a boy, would disappear again. In half an hour he'd be back with their lunch. Sometimes it would be a piece of fruit or a scrap of meat. Often it was nothing but a dry crust. But sometimes there would be one of those flat, rich cakes, sprinkled with raisins and sugar that Tito liked so much. At supper time, the same thing happened, although there was a little less of everything, for things were hard to snatch in the evening with the streets full of people. Now, something kind of unique I want you to keep your eyes on. They mention this this flat, rich cake sprinkled with raisins and sugar. Now, please remember that because that'll be coming up later in the story. Besides, Bimbo didn't approve too much food before going to sleep. A heavy supper made boys too restless and dogs too stodgy. And it was the business of a dog to sleep lightly with one ear open and muscles ready for action. Now, how does Bimbo show his loyalty to Tito? Well, when I see this, Bimbo, remember, is the dog, and Bimbo is um, basically taking care of Tito. They have set spots where they go and sit and rest, and then while Tito is resting, Bimbo will go out and get food. And seems like it'd be much easier for the dog if he just did his own thing and worried about himself. But this dog cares enough about Tito to make sure he brings the food. But whether there's much or little, hot or cold, fresh or dry, food was always there. Tito never asked where it came from, and Bimbo never told him. There was plenty of rainwater in the hollows of soft stones. The old egg woman at the corner sometimes gave him a cupful of strong goat's milk. In the grape season, the fat winemaker let him have drippings of the mild juice. So there was no danger of going hungry or thirsty. There was plenty of everything in Pompeii if you knew where to find it, and if you had a dog like Bimbo. As I had said before, Tito was not the merriest boy in Pompeii. He could not romp with the other youngsters and play hare and hounds, and I spy and follow your master, and ball against the building and jackstones and kings and robbers with them. But that did not make him sorry for himself. If he could not see the sights that delighted the lads of Pompeii, he could hear and smell things they never noticed. He could really see more with his ears and nose than they could with their eyes. When he and Bimbo went out walking, he knew just where they were going and exactly what was happening. Something I find kind of unique here, if you look up at these names of the games, Hare and Hounds, that would be like similar to probably Tag. I Spy, that's a game we play. Follow Your Master, we probably call that Follow the Leader. Ball against the building, probably just like it sounds, a ball being thrown against the building. Jack Stones, that'd be Jack, where you drop the ball and you try to pick up rocks or stones. And then Kings and Robbers would probably be Cops and Robbers. Ah, he'd sniff and say as they passed a handsome villa, Glaucus Panza is giving a grand dinner tonight. They're going to have three kinds of bread and roast pigling, and stuffed goose and great stew. I think a bear stew and a fig pie. And Bimbo would note this would be a good place to visit tomorrow. Or, Tito would murmur, half through his lips, half through his nostrils. The wife of Marcus Lucretius is expecting her mother. She's shaking out every piece of goods in the house. She's going to use the best clothes, the ones she's been keeping in pine needles and camphor. And there's an extra girl in the kitchen. Come, Bimbo, let's get out of the dust. Or as they passed the small but elegant dwelling opposite the public baths, too bad, the tragic poet is ill again. It must be a bad fever this time, for they're trying smoke fumes instead of medicine. Whew, I'm glad I'm not a tragic poet. Or as they neared the forum, what good things they have in the Maculum today. It really was a sort of butcher grocery marketplace, but Tito didn't know any better. He called it the Maculum. Dates from Africa, and salt oysters from sea caves, and cuttlefish, and new honey, and sweet onions, and water buffalo steaks. Come, let's see what in the forum. And Bimbo, just as curious as his comrade, hurried on. Being a dog, he trusted his ears and nose like Tito more than his eyes, and so the two of them entered the center of Pompeii. Now, it talked about going to the forum. The forum would be considered similar to like the town square. This is where all the citizens would gather at least once a day. Now, what details help you infer that Bimbo is important to Tito? Well, remember, Tito is a boy, Bimbo is the dog, and it sounds like Tito talks to Bimbo quite a bit, and they don't go anywhere without each other, and they really rely on each other. So, my inference or my guess is Tito's or Bimbo's important to Tito because they do rely on each other. The Forum was the part of the town to which everybody came at least once each day. It was the central square, and everything happened here. There were no private houses, all was public. The chief temples, the gold and red bazaars, the silk shops in the town hall, the booths belonging to the weavers and jewel merchants, the wealthy woolen market, the shrine of the household gods, everything glittered here. The buildings looked as if they were new, which in a sense they were. The earthquake of 12 years ago had brought down all the old structures. And since the citizens of Pompeii were ambitious to rival Naples and even Rome, they had seized the opportunity to rebuild the whole town, and they had done it all within a dozen years. There was scarcely a building that was older than Tito. Now, this may give us a little background into why Tito's an orphan. How old is Tito? They say 12 to 13 years. Most of the town was rebuilt because all of the buildings had fallen down from an earthquake. So that makes me think that Tito may have lost his parents in the earthquake. Tito had heard a great deal about the earthquake, though being about a year old at the time, he could scarcely remember it. This particular quake had been a light one, as earthquakes go. The weaker houses had been shaken down, and parts of the outworn wall had been wrecked, but there was little loss of life, and the brilliant new Pompeii had taken the place of the old. No one knew what caused these earthquakes. Records showed they had happened to the neighborhood since the beginning of time. Sailors said that it was to teach the lazy city folks a lesson and make them appreciate those who risked the dangers of the sea to bring them luxuries and protect their town from invaders. The priests said the gods worked this way of showing took this way of showing their anger to those who refused to worship properly and who failed to bring enough sacrifices to the altar. And they didn't say it in so many words, presents to the priest. The tradesmen said that the foreign merchants had corrupted the ground and it was no longer safe to traffic in imported goods that came from strange places and carried a curse with them. Everybody had a different explanation, and everybody's explanation was louder and sillier than his neighbors. And a lot of times in ancient times, when they didn't understand something, they would often attribute, bad things that happened to God being unhappy with the people and people being punished. Nowadays, we know it's a lot about plate tectonics and things like that, but back then they wouldn't have known this. They were talking about it this afternoon as Tito and Bimbo came out of the side street into the public square. The Forum was the favorite promenade for rich and poor. A promenade is kind of basically a area where you walk around. What with the priests arguing with the politicians, servants doing the day's shopping, tradesmen crying their wares, women displaying the latest fashions from Greece and Egypt, children playing hide and seek among the marble columns, knots of soldiers, sailors, peasants from the provinces, to say nothing of those who merely came to just lounge and look on. The square was crowded to its last inch. His ears, even more than his nose, guided Tito to the place where the talk was loudest. It was in front of the shrine of the household gods that, naturally enough, the householders were arguing. Okay? Now, note important details about the forum. What does the description tell you about life in Pompeii? It seems like it was very well relaxed. A lot of these people are going and they're lounging and they're just visiting in this forum area. The forum is a place where you would meet people and be very similar to what a town square is. I tell you, rumbled a voice which Tito recognized as Bathmaster Rufus's. There won't be another earthquake in my lifetime or yours. There may be a tremble or two, but earthquakes, like lightnings, never strike twice in the same place. Do they not? Asked a thin voice Tito had never heard. It had a high, sharp ring to it, and Tito knew it as the accent of a stranger. How about the two towns of Sicily that had been ruined 3 times within 15 years by the eruptions of Mount Etna? And were they not warned? And does that column of smoke above Vesuvius mean nothing? That Tito could hear the grunt with one question answered another. That's always there. We use it for our weather guide. When the smoke stands straight up, we know we'll have fair weather. When it flattens out, it's sure to be foggy. When it drifts to the east, yes, yes, yes. Cut in the edged voice. I've heard about your mountain barometer, but the column of smoke seems hundreds of feet higher than usual, and it's thickening and spreading like a shadowy tree. They say in Naples, oh, Naples! Tito knew the voice by the little squeak that went with it. It was Attiloia, the cameo cutter. They talk while we suffer. Little help we got from them the last time. Naples commits the crimes, and Pompeii pays the price. It's become a proverb with us. Let them mind their own business. Yes, grumbled Rufus, and others too. Very well, my confident friends, responded the thin voice, which now sounded curiously flat. We also have a proverb, and it is this: those who will not listen to men must be taught by the gods. And I say no more, but I leave a last warning. Remember the holy ones. Look to your temples, and when the smoke tree above Vesuvius grows to the shape of an umbrella pine, look to your lives. Now, I want to kind of backtrack up here to where it's talking about this mountain barometer. The people of Vesuvius at this time used this, the smoke rising from the mountain, which happened every day, as kind of a weather forecaster. If the smoke went straight up in the air, it was going to be a nice day. You have low pressure. If the smoke was kind of pressed down toward the ground and looked like it had a wall over top, that was a high pressure system. And much in the same way, if the Indians used to use this when they would have smoke in their fires, if the smoke from their fires went straight up, they knew the weather was going to be good for hunting. And if it was flattened out, it meant that the weather was going to be changing soon, one way or the other. And this man who's a visitor comes in, he sees, you know, sees this smoke cloud and it looks different to him. And you got to remember, if you see something every day and it changes a little every day, you're not going to notice it if you're always seeing it. But here's a gentleman that probably comes in once every 6 months or once every year, and he notices that the cloud is quite a bit bigger, and he's trying to warn these people. Tito could hear the air whistle, as the speaker drew his toga about him, and the quick shuffle of feet told him the stranger had gone. Now what? Said the cameo cutter. What did he mean by that? I wonder, grunted Rufus. I wonder. Tito wondered too, and Bimbo, his head at the thoughtful angle, looked as if he had been doing a heavy piece of pondering. By nightfall, the argument had been forgotten. If the smoke had increased, no one saw it in the dark. Besides, it was Caesar's birthday, and the town was in holiday mood. Tito and Bimbo were among the merrymakers, dodging the charioteers who shouted at them. A dozen times they almost upset baskets of sweets and jars of Vesuvian wine, said to be as fiery as the streams inside the volcano. And a dozen times they were cursed and cuffed, but Tito never missed his footing. He was thankful for his keen ears and quick instinct, but most thankful of all for Bimbo. They visited the uncovered theater, and though Tito could not see the faces of the actors, he could follow the play better than most of the audience, for their attention wandered. They were distracted by the scenery, the costumes, the byplay, even by themselves, while Tito's whole attention was centered in what he heard. Then to the city walls, where the people of Pompeii watched a mock naval battle in which the city was attacked by the sea and saved after thousands of flaming arrows had been exchanged and countless colored torches had been burned. Though the thrill of flaring ships and lighted skies was lost to Tito, The shouts and cheers excited him as much as any, and he cried out with the loudest of them. The next morning there were two of his beloved raisin and sugar cakes for his breakfast. Bimbo was unusually active and thumped his bit of a tail until Tito was afraid he would wear it out. The boy could not imagine whether Bimbo was urging him to some sort of game or was just trying to tell him of something. After a while, he ceased to notice Bimbo. He felt drowsy. Last night's late hours had tired him. Besides, there was a heavy mist in the air. No, a thick fog rather than a mist. A fog that got into his throat and scraped it and made him cough. He walked as far as the marine gate to get a breath of the sea, but the blanket of haze had spread all over the bay, and even the salt air seemed smoky. Now, E here, notice the way that Tito reacts to Bimbo's behavior. In what ways does his reaction suggest that something has changed? Okay? Um, Tito, first of all, Bimbo brings Tito two rolls, which is kind of a unique thing. Secondly, Tito recognizes that Bimbo is very impatient and it smells smoky and something is different. Their routine is slightly different. They're not just getting up, eating breakfast, and going about their day. They're now going and trying to find fresh air. He went to bed before dusk and slept, but he did not sleep well. He had too many dreams of ships lurching in the forum, of losing his way in a screaming crowd, of armies marching across his chest, of being pulled over every rough pavement in Pompeii. He woke early, or rather, he was pulled awake. Bimbo was doing the pulling. The dog had dragged Tito to his feet and was urging the boy along. Somewhere, where? Tito did not know. His feet stumbled uncertainly. He was still half asleep. For a while he noticed nothing except the fact that it was hard to breathe. The air was hot and heavy, so warm that he could taste it. The air, it seemed, had turned into a warm powder that stung his nostrils and burned his sightless eyes. Then he began to hear sounds, peculiar sounds like animals under the earth, hissing and groaning and muffled cries that a dying creature might make, dislodging the stones of his underground cave. There's a good image of an artist's rendition of what it looked like. There was no doubt of it. The noises came from underneath. He not only heard them, he could feel them. The earth twitched, the twitching changed to an uneven shrugging of the soil. Then, as Bimbo half pulled, half coaxed him across, the ground jerked away from his feet and he was thrown against a stone fountain. The water, hot water, splashing in his face revived him. He got to his feet, Bimbo steadying him, helping him on his way. The noises grew louder and they came closer. The cries were even more animal like than before, but now they came from human throats. A few people, quicker of foot and more hurried by fear, began to rush by, a family or two, then a section. Then it seemed an army broken out of bounds. Tito, bewildered, thought he was, though he was, could recognize Rufus as he bellowed past him, like a water buffalo gone mad. Time was lost in this nightmare. Now, a couple of unique things here. First of all, these sounds coming from under the ground are probably the plate starting to shift, and you have an earthquake. But something that's kind of unique is why was the water in the fountain so hot? Well, the water obviously is coming from under the ground. If you're having any sort of plate tectonic activity, the water can get too close to the lava, and that may heat the water up. So that's something unique, and that's something different for, remember, um, Tito's a blind boy. He can't see what's going on around him. So it would just be mass chaos right now. It was then the crashing began. First, a sharp crackling like a monster snapping of twigs. Then a roar like the fall of a whole forest of trees. Then an explosion that tore earth and sky. The heavens, though Tito could not see them, were shot through with continual flickerings of fire. Lightnings were above, lightnings above were answered by thunders beneath. A house fell, then another. By a miracle, the two companions had escaped the dangerous side streets and were in a more open space. It was the Forum. They rested here a while. How long, he didn't know. Tito had no idea of the time of day. He could feel it was black, an unnatural blackness. Something inside, perhaps a lack of breakfast and lunch, told him it was past noon, but it didn't matter. Nothing seemed to matter. He was getting drowsy, too drowsy to walk. But walk he must, he knew it. And Bimbo knew it. The sharp tugs told him so. Nor was it a moment too soon. The sacred ground of the Forum was safe no longer. It was beginning to rock, then to pitch, then to split. As they stumbled out of the square, the earth wriggled like a caught snake, and all of the columns of the Temple of Jupiter came down. It was the end of the world, or so it seemed. And that's kind of a unique picture. If you look at these blocks here, this is kind of your crosswalk, and pedestrians would actually step on these, and then if there was any rain, these would act like gutters too. So kind of unique. To walk was not enough now, they must run. Tito was too frightened to know what to do or where to go. He had lost all of his sense of direction. He started to go back to the inner gate, but Bimbo, straining his back to the last inch, almost pulled his clothes from him. What did the creature want? Had the dog gone mad? Then suddenly he understood. Bimbo was telling him the way out, urging him there, to the sea gate, of course. The sea gate, and then the sea, far from falling buildings, heaving ground. He turned, Bimbo guiding him across open pits and dangerous pools of bubbling mud, away from buildings that had caught fire and were dropping their burning beams. Tito could no longer tell whether the noises were made by the shrieking sky or the agonized people. He and Bimbo ran on, the only silent beings in a howling world. New dangers threatened. All Pompeii seemed to be thronging toward the marine gate, and squeezing among the crowds. There was the chance of being trampled to death, but the chance had to be taken. It was growing harder and harder to breathe. What air there was had choked him. It was all dust now, dust and pebbles, pebbles as large as beans. They fell on his head and his hands, pumice stones from the black heart of Vesuvius. The mountain was turning itself inside out. Tito remembered a phrase that the stranger had said in the Forum 2 days ago. Those who will not listen to men must be taught by the gods. The people of Pompeii had refused to heed the warnings. They were being taught now, if it was not too late. Suddenly it seemed too late for Tito. The red hot ashes began blistering his skin. The stinging vapors tore his throat, and he could not go on. He staggered toward a small tree at the side of the road and fell. In a moment, Bimbo was beside him. He coaxed, but there was no answer. He licked Tito's face, hands, his feet, his face. The boy did not stir. Then Bimbo did the last thing he could, the last thing he wanted to do. He bit his comrade, bit him deep in the arm. With a cry of pain, Tito jumped to his feet, Bimbo after him. Tito was in despair, but Bimbo was determined. He drove the boy on, snapping at his heels, worrying his way through the crowd, barking and baring his teeth, heedless of kicks or falling stones. Sick with hunger, half dead with fear and sulfur fumes, Tito pounded on, pursued by Bimbo. How long he never knew. At last he staggered through the marine gate and felt soft sand under him. Then Tito fainted. Now, why did Bimbo bite Tito in line 255? Bimbo did the last thing he could, the last thing he wanted to do. Why did he bite him? Well, Obviously, Tito had passed out, and he tried to lick him awake and nudge him awake, but he had to do something to bring a pain response. So, uh, someone was dashing seawater over him. Someone was carrying him toward a boat. Bimbo, he called, and then louder, Bimbo! But Bimbo had disappeared. Voices jarred against each other. Hurry, hurry, to the boats! Can't you see the child's frightened and starving? He keeps calling for someone. Poor boy, he's out of his mind. Here, child, take this. They tucked him in among them. The oarlocks creaked and the oars splashed. The boat rode over toppling waves. Tito was safe, but he wept continually. Bimbo, he wailed. Bimbo, Bimbo. He could not be comforted. Now, here's a unique part of the story. This spot right here, we're actually going to go into the future. So, 1800 years passed. So, this is well past the time of the eruption. Scientists were restoring the ancient city. Excavators were working their way through the stones and trash that had buried the entire town. Much had already been brought to light: statues, bronze instruments, bright mosaics, household articles, even delicate paintings had been preserved by the fall of ashes that had taken over 2,000 lives. Columns were dug up and the forum was beginning to emerge. It was at a place where the ruins lay the deepest that the director paused. Now, this director, he's the director of the excavation that's um, digging, the scientists that are digging up the old city. Come here, he called to his assistants. I think we've discovered the remains of a building in good shape. Here are four huge millstones that were most likely turned by slaves or mules. And here is a whole wall standing with shelves inside it. Why, it must have been a bakery. And here's a curious thing. What do you think I found under this heap where the ashes were the thickest? The skeleton of a dog. Amazing, gasped an assistant. You'd think a dog would have had enough sense to run away with at the time. And what is that flat thing he's holding between his teeth? It can't be a stone. No, it must have come from this bakery. You know, it looks to me like some sort of cake hardened with the years. And bless me if those little black pebbles aren't raisins. A raisin cake almost 2,000 years old. I wonder what made him want it at such a moment. I wonder, murmured the assistant. Now, what did Bimbo's last actions tell you about him? Now, we know from the story, because Tito loves those cakes, that this dog is more than likely Bimbo. And obviously, Bimbo gave in to the fumes, passed out, probably died fairly quickly. But if you look here, his last actions were to get food for Tito, and I think that's a pretty neat way to end the story. Now, this the theme of this whole story is loyalty and friendship, and you see that in both of the main characters. Uh, Bimbo is loyal to Tito, and Tito is loyal to Bimbo, and both of them were sad, saddened at the end because they were separated. But that's the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure when you get done that you answer the two questions that go with this story on Canvas. Remember to use races and do a great job. Thank you.